Cool. Fucking hell. So inherent prejudicial sort of bias and those who feel the need to elevate themselves by sort of demeaning and humiliating and kind of just dominating somebody else, out of often a place of their own insecurity and sort of broken, sort of fractured humanity, which so much of the time is part of a perpetual cycle where people don't actually have the kind of the rational discrimination or autonomy or sense of self or ego beyond their prefrontal cortex to be able to witness what they're doing and say, whoa, I'm a complete piece of shit. I'm actually just doing this literally just to try and make somebody cry like they're already crying, and I'm just saying abusive stuff and humiliating stuff which I'm only doing because I'm a cunt, and there isn't really any other way around it. Like when people who are racist to other people, they do it because, like I've always said, tried to teach my little brother who's never really had a father figure, and God forbid I'm his male role model, but I've always said that like racism is basically rooted in ignorance. It's like if you took somebody that didn't like Indian people or didn't like African people and you took them to go and live in India for a year and live and work and cohabit with Indian people, by the end of the year they would be 99% probability they would be cured of their racism. They'd say, no, actually Indian people are safe, they're just like us, they play cricket and drink tea and watch EastEnders, and they eat food and fuck their wives and go to bed just like we do, and they're just normal people, and African people are just normal people. They're just like us, but they look a bit different and they're a bit culturally different. I've been doing a lot of research into like child sex trafficking and crime and punishment recently, after I stumbled across some really shocking figures on the internet. The figures weren't really comparable metrics, but AI did put them into a comparable metric. So per capita figures on victims of child sex trafficking, in the total child sex trafficking figures for Nigeria, 7.8 out of 1,000, which can constitute 75% children. I don't know what 75% of 7.8 is, but I'm sure you could easily work that out on a calculator, just like you could probably work out if you were being absolutely risible in your kind of conduct towards somebody else, or if someone's been risible and revolting towards you on the grounds of sort of some demographic prejudice, or maybe as a fortuitous discrepancy of their own kind of jaded and sort of damaged personal psychological makeup. Who knows? You can bounce moral relativism around as much as you like, really, and you can go on that. You can go on that kind of cyclical, well, we're all a product of our experiences carousel for ages and ages and ages. But I think that it's kind of it's not without a sense of irony that people talk about sort of racism and the horror that is. Like it's a revolting human trait for us to discriminate on any gender, race, creed, religion, culture, anything which we discriminate on a holistic basis that kind of generalises everybody within some demographic as having some personal traits is wrong. The problem I've had is trying to look at these figures and trying to present the figures on child sex trafficking in a hospital which is predominantly staffed by Nigerian staff. I don't want to start, I'm sort of asking them about it, if they can sort of point me in the direction of research or organisations that might be able to give me better stats and figures, because it seems like child sex trafficking is a much bigger problem in Nigeria. And like I've said in my writings and my posts, it is because of desperation. People who are so fucking hungry that they, are selling their own children is absolutely just crushingly tragic, and that does happen around the world in places where there is food scarcity and there is economic disparity. And whilst Nigeria is a very wealthy economy because it's oil refineries, in terms of economic GDP and its stats, there is small pockets of extreme wealth in Nigeria, but there's also massive disparity and huge areas of poverty, just like a lot of African nations. And I guess what the worst thing you can do, if you've been the victim of prejudice, is to then grow into a prejudicial person yourself. Not the worst thing you can do, but the worst consequence of that happening. If you've been sort of marginalised, or you feel that you might have been subjected to some sort of proportionate discrimination, and that can't not have shaped you. That can't not have changed your view on your own personal identity and the way that you see the world. But I guess try not to be like the paedophiles who, abused as young children, go on to then abuse other people. If you've been the victim of discrimination, don't allow that to shape you into somebody else who just uses the most vile, crushing, discriminatory language. Or your actions. Don't get involved in sort of trying to cover up for or obfuscate revolting acts of discrimination against other people who've done nothing to hurt anybody ever, just because you might have been the victim of discrimination. I don't know. It can be very pendulous, and I'm not an expert on social sciences. I've only got 2 GCSEs. I know there are some people that have been to like 13 different primary schools and also don't really have any GCSEs. So academically, although I might be quite verbose, I don't have many academic qualifications. And as one of the chaps I spoke to about it the other day, I said, did you know you're kind of 3 out of 4 people trafficked in Nigeria are children, and there's 7.8 people are trafficked out of 1,000 compared to 0.11 in this country. So you could argue that you're 71 times more likely to be trafficked and sold for sex to slavery in Nigeria than you are in the UK. Whilst those per capita figures don't add up, let me see if I can find you there. What did I post on the internet? There was a quote which basically encapsulated what I was trying to say about this. So in conclusion, while it's not a perfect one-to-one correlation, a statistically high number or proportion of victims of child sex abuse and trafficking in the country strongly suggests a higher number or proportion of perpetrators operating within, from, or targeting that country. It's a reasonable inference based on the nature of these crimes and the interconnectedness of perpetrators and victims within geographical and social contexts. However, considering the complexities of cross-border crime and data collection methods is essential for a comprehensive understanding. So I'm just, without any equivocation, I condemn racism, and I condemn prejudice, and I condemn bias, and like more than anything, I condemn cruelty. People who are just cruel, like there's just doing things just to make people want to cry, and just to make them feel embarrassed, and just to make them feel crushed, is, even if you've experienced that, something which we all have to be careful. I have to be careful. I've had a hard life. I've had people that have tried to blow me to bits and burn me in my home and poison me and shoot me, frame me for murder and all kinds of nasty things. I've been buggered under hypnosis, and I've been poisoned, and I've been defrauded of fucking fortunes, and I've had people mocking the death. Like literally in the last week, people openly mocking the death of my parents, who both died in untimely and slightly unusual circumstances. And yeah, just generally treating my family. There was a picture, I don't know where it was from, in Africa, and there was a picture of a tree out in the bush, right? And there's this tree in the middle, and there's all these tracks, these animal tracks, of where all these animals had flocked to this tree for sustenance and nutrients, and whether it was water or the fruit from the tree or the shade from the tree from the sun, or you could see that this tree had been a source of nourishment and sustenance and nutrients. And that's a little bit like what's happened to my family and I. There's just been loads of people who, I'm not going to use the word parasite because it's really derogatory for those who've suffered negative consequences, but yeah, like in the conceptual kind of basis that everybody needs to survive, and everybody's got carnal desires and wants and needs and urges, and they're sometimes governed by central nervous responses. They're not things that are kind of like they're not things that exist as sort of predominantly frontal decisions. They're things which just manifest within us, and for better or worse, we are warts and all, we are who we are. There's a type of enlightenment, like, I don't want to start talking about crown chakras and Plato's cave, because it's a bit of a detraction from what I'm trying to say, if I don't stammer detraction out of my mouth in my pre-showered, pre-brushed teeth state. just kind of feeling a bit animated at the absolute absurdity and the visceral cruelty of what some people are doing on the internet. Yeah, like I think that, you know, we are 90% of who people are, you know, is external factors. You know, it's like our opinions aren't our own. You know, if a plant doesn't grow right, we don't blame the plant. You know, it doesn't get enough light, doesn't get enough nutrient, grows imperfectly, perfectly. We don't blame the plant in that situation. You know, 90% of who you are is, you know, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to manage and govern your conduct and decide whether you're going to kind of, you know, kick a bereaved woman in the womb, figuratively speaking, and whether you're going to kind of smile while you do that and expect no fucking consequences either, mate. Because you know, it just baffles me sometimes how people can sort of, you know, be so conscious of their own victim consciousness, and rightly so. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't doubt that. I've been to Africa. I've been the only white person on the bus. You know, I know what that feels like, sort of, and I hadn't before. It was a greatly insightful thing for me, and like, it's fucked up. It's weird. Like, you know, like being a racial minority, in a place where you know that there's racial prejudice is like really fucked up. And I was on holiday with my white hairdresser girlfriend, and we went to Senegal in Africa, and yeah, we went to like a massive weed plantation, and, you know, went on a ferry with people with cages full of chickens and you know, all their laundry and half their family with them, you know, getting a ferry, you know, not for leisure or pleasure, but just because they needed to get home so they could go and walk 10 miles to get some fresh water to have a bowl of rice and chicken, and if they were lucky, you know. And they didn't like white people, some of them, you know, you could just smell it. It was just palpable. They didn't like, they saw us white tourists, me with my Armani watch on and her with her kind of like, her hair all done up to the nines, you know, loads of makeup on and a miniskirt in the hot weather. It was like, you know, we stuck out like sore thumbs, and like I smelt that and I felt that, and you know, like I kind of somatized that feeling of like denominational minority, and like I do have a minuscule iota of understanding of what that must be like, and I condemn it unilaterally whenever it happens in this country. Anyone who's a racist is a piece of shit, as far as I'm concerned. But anyone who's also trying to humiliate and deride, bully others into a state of fear and humiliation, you know, just for their own, I don't know whether it massages the ego or just helps to sort of cover things up, or exudes a sense of kind of narcissistic dominance or power, or, I mean, most obviously it's trying to defy the narrative, right? That's generally the kind of the course of what gets said and what gets, you know, put into the content of a lot of people's online identity, is just trying to sort of like, God, what if somebody shares this, you know, we might all go to jail for 80 fucking years, you know, and if you did go to jail for 80 years, then, you know, you'd be really sad. Just like the person sat opposite you might be really sad if you're criticizing them and, you know, belittling them and deriding them in a derisive, and, you know, as probably anybody except for the army of trolls that, you know, might operate on your side in the comments, everybody thinks it looks pathetic and revolting. Like, it does make you look pathetic being horrible to other people. It just makes you look like a cunt, and that, like, is because you're being one, you know. So don't be a cunt, be nice, condemn bigotry and any sort of abrasive, prejudicial ridicule in all its forms, and have a lovely Easter weekend, and just be nice to everybody. And if you feel like you're being nasty to somebody because somebody was nasty to you once, then, you know, try and lay that to rest, and, you know, in the spirit of the man who came back to life in a chocolate egg, try and forgive, and try and have a bit of empathy, a bit of humanity, a bit of humility, try and be humble, compassionate and loving, rather than kind of like egocentric, self-absorbed, vicious, you know, and sort of venomous. Because if you are egotistic, self-absorbed, vicious and venomous, not only will you probably face dire consequences for that, but the race is long, and in the end, it's only with yourself. You've only got yourself to forgive. For whatever happens, and you've only got yourself to forgive for. I've got to try and come to terms with a lot of bad shit that I've done. And like, trust me, kind of perpetuating cycles of injustice, be it against innocents or even guilty people, disproportionately or proportionately. Revenge isn't the path to enlightenment. It's not. And being nice to people, treating them with respect, is definitely the way forward. Because if you don't, then life gets hard.